Thank you. You are enabling my learning.
I'm so glad. I'm learning vicariously.
Yeah. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, Clara. When I heard your story, I was so impressed because it's everything that I try to teach, students about their childhood beliefs and how they will often rule the adult in us. Unconsciously, we don't realize that our actions and our behaviors, come from our childhood. Everything is rooted into the belief system that we learned from our caregivers at school, from our society, obviously, at a very young age. And so your story perfectly fits into that. So, why don't you tell us, a little bit about your story and how your belief system, has brought you to where you are today, which is a beautiful story.
Sure. So I was raised Hasidic. If you don't know what Hasidic is, you can just Google it. There's a recent Netflix show called Unorthodox that explains a little bit about the upbringing that I had. Like, it's a similar kind of story. So I was raised in a tiny village outside of Montreal, very isolated and sheltered from the world. And we went to Hasidic schools, girls only. The boys went to something called Cheder, like a center where they study all day long, only the Talmud and the Bible. And for me, growing up, Hasidic meant like there were rules 24/7, how you need to do things. Little things as just putting on your shirt had rules. Which armhole to put on first, which button, like all that stuff, like what shoelace to tie first, like what nail to clip first, like everything had rules.
Like, really? I mean, I'm Jewish. My background's Jewish, but obviously we're not Hasidic. We're modern Jews. But I didn't realize that it was governed by so many rules. So that came as a surprise to me.
Yeah, it's really specific to a sect called Haredi. Haredi has two parts. There are Hasidic and there are what we call yeshivish or litvish. So they take it one step further. Like, it's not just Orthodox Judaism. It's like ultra Orthodox, and it's like very strict. There's a lot of customs that become rules. So it's not really a rule from the Bible or from the rabbis, but they became rules just because they decided that all of the customs and all of the kind of like preventions for breaking the rules should also become a rule,
So in essence, rules, you could say that rules are beliefs, right? Because in order to follow that rule, you have to believe that that's the way you're supposed to do them.
Correct. And growing up with so many rules was not something that I realized is a difficult thing. It just becomes part of your life. So this is the only way you know how to live. What was very difficult was the fear and the guilt that was instilled in us from a very young age. Like, if you break a rule, that's called a sin, and then God is going to punish you if you don't repent. And the pressure of that was huge. Like, the teacher in second grade already taught us that we're not supposed to comb our hair on Shabbat, on the weekend, on Saturday. But it wasn't just told to us as a rule. We were told that for every hair that gets torn out, the punishment from God is that you die young. So imagine a second grader, and I come to play with my cousin, and I'm horrified. On the Saturday, I see her with a brush at the mirror, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want my cousin to die young, right? And I'm starting to beg her to stop brushing her hair, and then she's laughing at me, and she's like, my dad lets me do this. And I said, please ask him again. And when she comes back that afternoon, and she tells me she asked her dad, and her dad said, it's okay. I'm like, what kind of dad does that to their own child just for comfort, to risk their life? like my cousin was not raised this way. She was just a guest in touch. She came from the States for that weekend, but not everybody is raised to that extreme, right? And that's just an example, because we had lots of them. We had for modesty rules. There were horrifying stories of the punishments if you're not modest enough. Like really, really severely ingrained in us that fear and that guilt. So at age 17, my marriage was arranged. And luckily it was to a young, wonderful man who lived in my little village. And we started a life together, and we were not supposed to use birth control. We were expected to start a family right away. Although I did not have any schooling, like I did not have a high school diploma. It's just the Hasidic so-called school that I went to. And they had a little bit of English, a little bit of French, only for the girls. So basically I had minimal of English to be able to talk to a doctor, to be able to talk to a taxi driver and stuff like that, you know?
That's it.
Yes. And what happened was, as we started raising our kids, my husband was really determined to give our children the life that he never had. So he was not brought up the way I was. I had a relatively happy childhood, like relatively speaking, right? Because my parents, they are very dedicated people and very honest people. So I was able to trust them. And even though it was not an easy lifestyle, I was feeling safe with him, right? On the contrary, for him, he had a very abusive childhood. It was very traumatic for him. He had to stand on his own 2 feet from a very young age. And that really set up his trajectory to be able to think for himself, right? I had no reason in the world to question my lifestyle. But for him, as we started raising our kids, he was like, he wanted to prevent our kids from all the pain that he went through. So he was always trying creative ways within the ultra-Orthodoxy to find ways to make it easier for our kids. So like the rule is that your kid has to start saying blessings before they take a bite of food. Like before every food they take into their mouth, they have to say a blessing, and after the food they have to say a blessing. And my husband was like, why would he put that on a 3-year-old child, you know? And he went to the rabbi, and the rabbi said, yeah, the truth is you can let go of that rule for a 3-year-old because they still are in diapers. It's a desecration for God's name. So he comes home to tell me that. He was so excited to not put that onto our child. And I was like, oh my God, my mom is going to think that I am a bad person because I don't train my kids with that holy lifestyle, you know? So it was a really difficult journey because he was pushing one way. He was like extremely patient with me. He knew that I love our kids just as much as him, but he knew that I had this block, this belief that, yes, the fear of the punishment and the fear that this is wrong and this is like our teachers used to say, you're not supposed to even barge for a bit, not even a tiny hair from what you were raised to do, because it's a slippery slope. Like once you start, you're gone off the rail and your soul is already like a slide, you know, sliding into the abyss.
Let me ask you something. When you were in school, and you say, you know, you went to Orthodox school, obviously, with girls, were you exposed to life outside of that? Like, did you have any friends outside of your little bubble? TV? How about media? I mean, you would surely
Nothing.
have media. How do they control that?
Nothing. It's the rules that you have to abide by. If you want to belong to that community, there is no such a thing as TV, no such a thing as internet, no such a thing as a magazine. I remember as a young kid how the teachers used to brainwash the girls, even the parents who did like sneak in a magazine just for themselves, you know, like not to give the kids. The kid went and threw that away because the teacher was so brainwashing them how terrible it is, and they felt that they're saving their parents' Jewish library, this is just a trap, because a library is a terrible place for your soul to go to. And that was a little kid that I saw that. And then I grew up and I married my husband, and my husband was an incredible seeker, a big reader. He was always thirsty for knowledge. And then his dad was a little bit open-minded, and he did take him to the Jewish library in Montreal. And when I found out, it was like with that upbringing, right? But I knew I could trust my husband. He was a very pious man, so I wasn't afraid for his soul. I was just afraid my parents shouldn't find out. The community shouldn't find out, right? I knew he's only going to read the holy books. Like, even in the Jewish library, they had Hebrew books and stuff like that, right? So it was really a difficult journey, because he tried to teach me, to open my eyes, to teach me new ways of doing things that would be better for our kids. And I was always pushing against. I was so resistant because I was so afraid to change, right? Not just the instinctive resistance to change that we all have, but like really with an ingrained belief that this is really a danger to your soul, not just physical resistance, right? But like this whole big thing. Like, this is the end of you.
Where do you think he got his desire for seeking? I mean, you said he was also raised in a little bubble. Where did that come from for him? Where did he get that spark that said, wait a minute, there's another world out there?
So it's not that he tried to bring in the outer world. He was just trying to make it better for the kids. And I think his encouragement to be different, to not just follow blindly, was partly innate. He's just born to be an out-of-the-box thinker. And also he had an inspiration from leaders in the community who were kind of like very passionate about certain things, and they did stand out. They did speak out in a different way than the mainstream, even though it was more extreme. But it took a lot of guts, and he was really impressed by those leaders. He used to have cassettes from those leaders, and really he admired them a lot for their courage, right? And I think that's something that he learned from a young age, to like really to stand up for what he believes in. So basically what happened, many years that he worked on me, and we changed little things at a time, and then the community started sniffing that he is a threat. He's a threat. He's a threat. The minute you start thinking differently, you're a threat, right? So they started campaigning against him, like in a really vicious way. There was a really horrible day where it was the high holidays. There were lots of guests from out of town that came to visit the Grand Rabbi, to be with him for the high holidays. And there was this huge poster in the synagogue saying there's someone in our midst poisoning the youth. That was speaking about him. And they deliberately didn't mention his name so that people start talking, because nobody would have taken that seriously if they saw his name, because they knew him. He was the center in the synagogue. He was always having interesting stories and interesting resources. Everybody knew to go to him to ask if they needed something, to find out. He was like the living encyclopedia. And they deliberately didn't mention his name, so people started whispering, like, who, what, when, where. And that's how this whole noise began. And it became a big taboo to speak to him, because if the rabbis say that you have to stay away, we started walking on the street, and the people would go to the other side of the street because they're not supposed to associate. They were afraid from the authorities, So that was a really difficult time, and as a result of all that stress, like suddenly he was extremely isolated from being like the center in the synagogue. Nobody was even talking to him. That was like a death sentence, right? and suddenly it really affected his vision. He had an autoimmune disease that started attacking his vision as a result of all the stress. And it was a very traumatic time. I really felt like I was fearing that I'm gonna end up with a blind husband, right? Because he started having difficulty seeing me. If I was a few feet away, he couldn't even figure out if I'm smiling or frowning. You know, he really had a terrible reaction to all that stress. And then we decided, of course, to move. And we had 4 little kids at the time already. So go move, where, when, I don't know anything about the world. So it took some time to figure out where I'm going to move and how we're going to make it. And with a lot of difficulty, we moved to Montreal. That was like a half an hour away from that little village. And we moved into a Hasidic neighborhood in Montreal because my goal at the time was not to leave the Hasidic life, but just to find a better community that is not so toxic, right?
Yes.
And my son started going to the Montreal Hasidic Cheder, the boys' center where they teach the boys. And the Rebbe, the teacher over there, was hitting the kids. That's normal. And he was not used to that because my husband had taught me not to hit the kids, which was also a big change for me because corporal punishment is like the accepted way to raise kids. Not just the accepted way, but our teacher told us that this is the way you're going to grow up God-fearing Jew. Otherwise, you're going to grow up a wild animal.
I'm shocked.
So
we need to make a movie out of this.
Yeah. So basically what happened is it was a very long journey of undoing all those ingrained beliefs, right? But even after we were finally able to leave that community behind, there's a lot that I'm still unlearning. It's like a lifetime of unlearning, right? So even recently, I had this realization where I'm running to the window because I hear some high school kids at the bus stop laughing and screaming and squealing like high schoolers do, right? I'm living in the city. And in my mind, it was reliving of a horrible, tragic accident that happened in my neighborhood where a little kid was left outside and was run over by a car. So it's also a lot of ignorance in that community because you're not educated. Yeah, you don't have the basic child safety information, right? So, like, leaving a child outside is not something that, like, it's common sense. You don't do that. But if you just run up to take a phone call, I'm going to be back in a minute. You're not aware, you know? You're not, it's such a stressful kind of way of living where you're not even able to use common sense because you're always, like, in this robotic state of, like, more rules, more things that you have to follow, right? So for me, I realized that just every time I hear this squealing outside, it's like, for me, I'm like running to the window to see if somebody's crying for help and asking to call 911 because there's an accident. So it's really a lot deeper than just a limiting belief. It's on a cellular level, right? It's this traumatic experience that is remembered in the body.
Sure, and it gets triggered, right?
And it gets correct. So that is not enough to do just like CBT or stuff like that, where you can tell yourself a new belief. There's a whole new level of healing that needs to happen, where your body can experience a new way of being and know that it's safe now, that it's all right. So I use different modules and different ways of healing for that, because this is like a whole new level of relearning how to live in a peaceful way, right? So yeah, it's a very cool way to realize that nothing is stagnant in our life, right? Everything keeps evolving, and whether we like it or not, whether we do something about it or not, it's always changing. It's just we can decide if we want to change it for the better or just
resist it. Yeah.
Exactly. And when the thing, what I learned from my journey, because I resisted my husband informing me, right, because I was so afraid of all the change, I realized if I didn't, in the end, let myself learn new ways, what would have happened? I would have stayed there. It wouldn't just stay the same, because I'm the oldest of 11 kids. And I plan to have even more, because that's the value of a woman, the more kids they can bring up, right? And for me, I'm sure, I have no doubt, I would have ended up in the hospital with a nervous breakdown. I couldn't do that. I'm not my mom. My mom is really like, she's a superwoman. But for me, I'm a very much like, I'm not such a doer. I'm more of a thinker. I'm more like, I used to write poetry. I used to write songs to glorify this culture. I used to do a lot of things with my mind more than with my hands. So to raise 11 kids, you need to be good with your hands. You need to be very quick and cooking and cleaning and all that, right? So it wouldn't have just stayed the same in the sense that my life would not be as happy as now, but it would have gotten a lot worse. And that's not just when you live in a sect like that. That's in every sense. Whenever we have the chance to change, it's always the input that we give it makes it for the better. And if we resist it, it's okay, right? It's just a natural way of doing it. But it's not just going to stay the same. We have a choice of doing something about it to make it better, or it will start becoming worse.
Yes.
Like my husband used to say, human beings are born to be creative, to be evolving, right? And what happens in a place where we were brought up, the evolution was not in wisdom, but it was in craziness. They kept on putting more rules and more. You have to evolve somewhere, right? So you either become smarter and bring in more information and create from that, or you take the mud that you're in and you just build on that, right? So it's really a very core value that I adopted since I started this journey, where I'm like always trying to stay open to new information. My husband used to say, I'm ready to change every day, to change my mind every day. And to me, I was raised to believe that change meant you're unstable. Like you're just a fly around, like you have no basis.
Of course, it's said to be in a culture that is passed down. Like, there's a specific recipe and you stay within that.
Exactly.
Otherwise, is it safe?
Exactly. So for me, this is such a liberating way of living, where you're not fixed. Nothing is stagnant. You're constantly evolving. You're constantly opening yourself to see things in a new way, to grow, to learn, right? And it's like an adventure. It's a lifetime adventure.
And now you still live within a Hasidic community?
No. We left that community over 10 years ago already. And it was very traumatic because they tried to take our kids away. We had police breaking down our door. They made a whole claim to Child Protective Services. It was really serious. It's not like you can just leave when you want. There's a high price to pay. There are many of my friends who left and they were torn away from their own kids. They can't see their own kids. They can't have contact with their own kids. They're robbed away from their own kids. Parental alienation is like a common thing.
And nothing, like, I guess, outside of that community, other people looking in, they can't do anything about it. I mean, that cannot be legal.
No, it's not legal, but the problem is it's not any big change that needs to happen. It's not something that happens instantly, right? So I believe the first step is to raise awareness, and that's why I am very outspoken about this. And that's why I'm very grateful to the people who created the Netflix show Unorthodox. Things like that just raise awareness, and that's the first step. And then there are people like little by little to start making change. So my husband and I, we filed a lawsuit against the government here in Quebec to enforce the law that every child deserves a basic education. Like, education is key. If you don't have the education, you don't have the tools to know your basic human rights. That's how you can be pushed around, right?
Especially the girls. So even the boys are not encouraged to just the Hasidic basic education, the Talmud. That's
only the Talmud, and even the Talmud, they're not studying it in a way of intellectual learning. It's more like rote, like this is the Hebrew, this is the translation, this is what the rabbi said, blah blah blah. It's not a stimulation for the brain. It's just like everything that you have to follow, right?
To conform to the society that they have.
Correct. Yes.
And so what about jobs? Like, if you don't have, the education, do they assign, like, how does a community get to maintain itself and grow if no one has, education?
So that's the thing. To live in the community, you don't always need an education that desperately, because for me, I was a high school teacher without even a high school diploma.
Like, I was a doctor. What do you
No, there's no ideal to be a doctor, because when you live in that community, you just go to the hospital when you need a doctor. When you don't just make an appointment with a doctor. And in the community, the ideal is to be a rabbi, to be a scholar in the Talmud, like that kind of. To be a teacher in the school, that's like a very distinguished and prestigious job,
And it's just to perpetuate their culture. That's pretty much the whole basis, right? To keep the fear and the shame and the.
It's not intentionally by the followers to perpetuate the shame and the fear. It's more the leaders who are gaining power through it, and the followers are just blindly not even realizing that they are like cogs in the game, right? So for me, I was perpetuating it. I wrote songs to glorify this culture. I really believed all the indoctrination that this is like the best way of living. So that's why my story is such a huge example of what change can do to a person. Because for me, I was like the other extreme. Nobody could have guessed in a million years that I would get out of there. But it's with tiny little steps that we take that we can get our goals met. Because my husband had this goal for our kids to have the best life that he can give them, and he wanted us to give our kids an education, a normal education, a better childhood. And he didn't even know how it's going to happen, but he took tiny steps at a time, and until he got this dream come true. Like my son is now in university, my daughter is in college, and we're like the first family in the Hasidic community that was raised so extreme and who really left as a family.
Now, with your children, so your children are they're not Hasidic or anything. You're just practicing Judaism, but at a different level.
Yeah, we're just traditional. Like we go to a Reconstructionist synagogue. We're enjoying Judaism as an enhancement of life, not a restriction.
Beautiful. I like how you said that. Beautiful. And so, for the people listening who, maybe they weren't brought up in such a structured setting, but in a way, we all have rules and beliefs that we perpetuate and we pass down to our children. I mean, what is the first step to really break the cycle? Because that's what we need to do. If we want to create better life for our children, we, the adults, need to break that cycle. And like you said, it was very difficult. What would be some steps that people can start to take?
So I very much believe in the concept of investing in yourself first. Like there's no way we can help our kids by just telling them. Kids don't do what we tell them. Kids do what we do, right? So when we want a better life for our kids, we have to start with ourselves. And for me, that meant taking better care of myself. I used to really neglect myself. And I was looking into the mirror and I really was disgusted with I hated myself. That's the kind of treatment that I gave to myself all these years, so repressing everything that I really wanted and just following by rote, right? So it took a long time for me to really start honoring myself. That's why I'm so passionate. I coach now self-compassion and self-love because this is where I started to save myself. I really hated myself. And now I am almost on the other side, like to really put myself first in a way where I know nobody is going to benefit from me if I don't take care of myself properly. Everybody is benefiting from my self-care, right? So I used to feel like as a mother, my obligation is to make sure my kids have everything they need. And that's still true, but that starts with taking care of myself.
Beautiful. And so many women, especially moms, I don't know what it is. Again, maybe it's just the way we were brought up. We are programmed to always put ourselves last, right? Everyone else comes first, the husband, the kids, and we're always last. And we're not even realize it.
And that's a very faulty conditioning. That's something that we have to unlearn because everything starts when you fill yourself up. You can't give something you don't have, right? And when you give yourself love, there's so much more love to give. I saw it with myself so strongly when I was in the beginning of this journey, and I was like, I had this built up resentment from always doing everything from everybody else and leaving myself not just last, but I just ignored myself. And then the goodness that I want to give, the love that I want to give gets turned into this resentment. So I hated myself, like seeing myself snap at my kid. I wanted to be the best mom, and here I'm like, I didn't know how to get out of this mess, right? So it took a long time to learn how to treat myself kinder, how to be less critical of myself. We have this critical voice in our head always, right? So now I have these tools that I can really be nice to myself. I don't have to be with this old mindset of constantly barraging myself with these messages of putting myself down, right? Of feeling like I'm a failure because I made a mistake. There are so many beautiful ways of healing that I've discovered, and it's really enhanced my life in a way that I never thought and imagined it could be. I thought I'm done. Like when I left the community, I felt like my kids are the ones that I saved, but I'm already damaged goods. I didn't know there was healing. I didn't know that a life outside was possible. I thought I'm saving my kids, but the truth is I saved myself.
And what was the first incline that you were healing? Like, what did you begin to experience that you said, okay, I'm on a healing path here? Sometimes we're not even aware.
So I bought a book called Better Boundaries. I bought it because the ad said that it's going to help you stop being so guilty, because I was always guilty, right? And then as I was reading this book, I realized, oh my God, I do deserve to live. I do. Like, why do I think everybody deserves except for me, right? And as soon as I started giving myself the basics that I deserved, I already saw a difference. I saw there was less resentment. I saw I was less stressed. I became a better human. I was proud of myself as being a better human, the mom that I was always hoping I'm going to be, just by taking better care of myself.
That's beautiful. And I remember when I heard you talk, you said something that in that community, you are taught that if you ask for help, you're a failure, like equals being a failure. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think asking for help is so important, not just for us women, for anybody. I mean, that's why we are pack animals. We need each other. There's nothing wrong with asking for help.
Exactly. And that's that individualism, that culture that we live in, the American idea of like being for yourself, like putting yourself first in a way where it's like you have to be self-sufficient. There's no such, it's such a lie, because as you said, we're pack animals. We cannot survive on our own. If you look around, any successful human that ever existed on this planet did not do it on their own. It's not possible, right? And for me, it was a very long lesson until I learned that, because for me, as you mentioned, I was raised in a culture where asking for help equaled you're a failure, equaled something must be wrong with me. Nobody told it to me, but it was like in the culture understood that if I asked for help, then like something is wrong with me. Like how come I can't manage on my own? You know, that's the kind of mindset. And it was a long time that I was still operating under that belief. And as I started investing in my healing and getting the help that I needed, I came to points in my life where I was almost crying, like, how could I have expected myself to do this alone? Look how many things open up for me. Look how much healing is possible for me just because I asked for help. And I expected that I'm going to be able to do this on my own. It's not even possible.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And now you took your pain, your hurtful past, and you made a gift out of it, because now you mentioned that you help parents learn to parent without guilt. Can you talk a little bit about that for other parents that are listening?
Yes. So I had this woman, I spoke with her about she was in a really difficult situation, and her husband was not well, and her son was special needs, and she was so busy putting everybody's needs before herself, right? And she is a very social person. I mean, I'm an introvert, but I can understand that when you are a social person and you deprive yourself of that basic, it's like you starve yourself. Yeah. It's not you're starving yourself from food, but it's like emotional food. It's like spiritual food. You need people to really strive and to really blossom, right? So I was telling her, like, how can she give herself that time in the day where she really takes care of what she needs, to meet with friends, even for a coffee? And she felt guilty, like, to do that while everybody else is needing her, right? So I told her, every time you go for coffee, you tell yourself you're doing this for your son. Your son is going to benefit from you. Your husband is benefiting from this, because the more you give yourself, the more you have to give to them.
So true. But it's a difficult concept, to understand, because even in business, with what I do, I feel guilty sometimes taking time off. Like, I would hardly take a day off and do nothing, and because in my mind it's, oh my gosh, now my business is going to suffer because I'm writing less or I'm creating less. And really, we have to understand that rest now propels me further.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. It's almost like when you try to take a ring off from your finger, right? It's stuck on your finger, and with pulling, you think it's going to come off. It's not going to come off by pulling. You put a little bit of oil and you just slide it smoothly and softly. The pull that we put on ourselves is just restricting. It's not enhancing our life. It's just making everything more difficult than it has to be. When we let ourselves not just rest, but there's also a big part we forget, to have fun. It's just play. Not just kids need that to grow a healthy kids, but adults need play too. There's a lot of study on that, like how much the brain is more productive and creative just when we allow ourselves to have some joy, you know? And when we do that, it's not just that we are allowed to do it, but we're enhancing our productivity so much more. You know, it's opening up everything in us. It's not like the universe needs us to be like this machine that works 24/7 in order to bring abundance in our life, right? It's the energy that we put out that brings what we need. And the energy of joy and self-love is the highest energy that we can bring all the good things that we need.
That's beautiful. And self-love is something that we don't learn. We, like I didn't learn about self-love till 4 years ago. In growing up, I never heard of the concept. Now, my daughter, when she was about 10, would walk around the house saying, I love myself, I love myself. Wow, it's so different today. There's so much more awareness towards self-love than we had growing up. And I think that's so important. Because often the love we seek in others, we can't get it, right? So we keep going from one relationship to another, not realizing that for us to attract that love, we first have to be that love for ourselves. And
exactly.
The most important relationship you can ever have is the one that you have with yourself, and from there, everything else gets fixed. All
exactly.
Relationships flourish.
Exactly. I used to be so dependent in the approval of others, like my parents, my friends, because that's the kind of culture I was raised with. If they approve of me, then I have value, right? So it took a long time for me, with all that was happening, to learn that I need to approve of myself. I need to be in touch with what I really believe, with my values. And that's when I have a vibrant life. With being dependent on everybody's approval, that just made a distorted way of living where I was not myself. I was constantly torn into pieces. Like everybody needs to give me that okay to move forward, right? And once I started really following my own inner guidance and my own inner voice, I stopped being so dependent on everybody else's approval, because now if I'm okay with myself, who cares if somebody else is not okay with that?
You touched up on a really good point, because one of the things that I teach in the FMTG course is that we have to first become aware of, because we have beliefs that we adopted from our caregivers, and becoming aware and really taking a step back and thinking, is this a belief that I actually believe, or do I just follow it because I inherited from my parents? And when you begin to question, is this something that I want to believe in or not? Is it mine? Like, we walk around with all these heavy things that are not even ours, right? So becoming aware of what it is that we want to be and want to believe and want to, what legacy we want to leave behind to our children, we have to be courageous enough, right? Not fearful, to step forward and create a new set of values for us.
Yes. And that takes practice. It's really beautiful when I can see in my own life. Like, I used to feel every morning if I woke up and it was like, oh my God, I have all these things to do, or oh my God, this and this is not taken care of yet, and have this right away in the morning, this feeling of like my day is not a good one, right? And you could have thought, like, I'm already 40, it's too late, I'm already having this belief for so many years. But no, now I enjoy every morning when I wake up. It's like, because I practice this new belief that I want to live by, it's like a snap with a finger. You just start thinking in the direction that I'm practicing right now, which is life is happening for me, right? Life is not happening to me. So everything that I have in my day is here to enhance my life. It's not always going to be comfortable. As you say, we need courage to get what we want. We don't, it's not in our comfort zone. Otherwise, we would have had it, right? It's always that little bit of inconvenience that we have to put up with to be able to get to what we want. It's not like we have to suffer, but we have to be willing to inconvenience ourselves.
And that's
right?
Yeah, we are taught that, to feel that discomfort, that stepping into the unknown, it's not okay. And I think that's what we need to embrace, that it's okay to feel the discomfort. It's okay to feel the fear, but you know what? We still have to go forward into that, because in that unknown is where the magic starts to happen.
Yes, yes. I remember a woman wanted me to share some of the lessons that I learned from my journey. And I started doing Yiddish videos on YouTube. And I was so afraid. Like, I was so petrified of what people are going to say and I'm going to think, and I'm going to be like, they're going to say bad things about me. But the will to help and the desperation of not keeping all these good lessons inside of me while others can benefit was a lot stronger than that fear. So I stepped into that inconvenience, right? And by now, there's like over 10,000 views, and people come and tell me how much it helped them. And I'm like, yeah, you see, I have this joy now of knowing that this little step that I took is helping so many people because I was willing to inconvenience myself.
You're facing your fear.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I loved your talk and your story, and I commend you for having the courage, to pursue your own dreams, your own life, your own values, and to really break the cycle for your children. I'm sure they're so proud of you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. It was such a pleasure. And there's so much we can learn, and grow. Like, I love the work that you're doing. It's such an important thing, It's like really a new way of being that can help people heal and grow and live the life that they deserve, right?
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. Here you have two examples of, we could have chosen just to stay and be the victim and just accept, but we took our pain and now we're out there sharing with the world, and hopefully your message, my message, can help others. And that's really what life is about. It's how do we enhance our planet, each other, because we're all one. At the end of the day, we're all connected.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Karen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Take care.